Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to 1,250 subscribers. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed already. I really couldn't do this without you, but let's push past this suppression. Are we nearly there? I don't know. It's really difficult to tell at the moment. So today is Doctor Who Sunday, and this week we are reviewing Twice Upon a Time, as chosen by you, the subscribers. To vote on the current poll, head on over to the community page where you'll find it. Make sure you are subscribed so that you know when the video is released. I cover Doctor Who every Sunday at 4 p.m. British Standard Time. Twice Upon a Time was written by Stephen Moffat, directed by Rachel Talalay, and it aired on the 25th of December 2017 to 7.92 million viewers. It marks the last episode of Peter Capaldi, who regenerates into Jodie Whittaker's version of the Doctor. Now, the Doctor does not want to regenerate after he was wounded by the Cybermen on the Mondasian colony's ship. He ends up landing on Antarctica, where he runs into his first incarnation of himself, originated by William Hartnell and now being played by David Bradley. His first incarnation also doesn't want to regenerate after his encounter with the Cybermen. However, in this case, this is because of, well, old age and dreading the first regeneration and not knowing what he's going to go into. They meet a World War I veteran who was whisked away from his time zone moments before his death. Why is he here? What on earth is preventing his death? And why does Bill Potts suddenly showing up out of the blue when the Doctor thought she had died at the hands of the Cybermen? I will start by saying this. This is probably, in actual fact, it is, now that I think about it, my favourite regeneration and final story in New Who. It's also where I believe the show should have actually ended instead of gender swapping the Doctor. By the way, I have a video on gender swapping following the statements from Jenna Ortega coming out tomorrow, so make sure you actually check it out at 4 p.m. if you would like to. Now, unfortunately, it didn't end there with the demise of the Capaldi Doctor, but if I apply the logic of RTD saying canon being whatever you want it to be, then the Doctor never regenerated into a woman, and that's okay. I know a lot of people truly rate the David Tennant last episode of Doctor Who, which is fine, you're allowed to, you really are. But this, to me, is as strong as a classic regeneration. And I'm a classic Who fan anyway, before New Who. This was something that I could easily rate against classic, quite easily, especially when you see the return of the first Doctor. Now, don't get me wrong, there are lots and lots of flaws with this story, despite it actually being my favorite. And I will say this, having done a lot of rewatching of the Capaldi era recently, I'm actually going to be starting to rate his Doctor higher than the David Tennant Doctor. But I just don't find this episode as long-winded as David Tennant's final story in the 10th incarnation of the Doctor. This one is much more concise and not so manic, mad energy Doctor, which we had quite a lot with the David Tennant and, to a degree, the Matt Smith Doctor as well. This episode was dark. It was creepy. It had multiple jump scares and dealt with the issue of death in a way that's not tackled in Doctor Who and what it means to die. Questioning of things like the afterlife can come into play. It even showed the Doctor making a factual error by saying World War One instead of the Great War, which would be more akin really to something that his companions were doing. But I figured that maybe Stephen Moffat wanted to put in the spoilers word one last time, that thing that he kept coming back to because of River Song. So it was an homage, I guess you could say, to River Song, because she doesn't appear in this episode. Now, this episode also brings back the historical aspect. And don't get me wrong, I love the sci-fi stuff in Doctor Who. But in the original, it also focuses a lot on history. The one thing that this episode teaches children and teenagers was that there was a Christmas armistice in World War One, and that was the only time that's ever happened. It adds a, I don't know what the word, melancholy. Oh, that word, I always butcher it, but it adds a melancholy feel to it at the end. That's what I think. And the start of the episode actually takes us all the way back to the 10th planet, which was 709 episodes ago, according to what we see on the screen at the beginning. It even says that, you know. We see the William Hartnell Doctor, Polly, and Ben all there, and it makes a very good and clean transition into colour and the David Bradley Doctor. That couldn't have actually been an easy thing to do, especially because you know you're going from black and white, the original formation of black and white, and you having to make a transition from a grainy picture of a partially missing episode at that as well, and putting it into the modern high-tech 4K colorization that we've got going on here. Now, I have often thought that it was quite a risk to reintroduce the first Doctor, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. The reason for that is because there's a risk of actually not writing him very well at all. However, when it comes to the writing of the classic Doctors, I would probably, even now with more hindsight, say that Moffat is probably the better man to do the job for it as opposed to RTD. I don't think RTD would have been able to do it and give Hartnell the justice that he deserves. Now, was the writing for the first Doctor perfect? No. He does have moments where he speaks to Bill like she's a child, and he could be more brusque than the Hartnell one towards her in the writing. And also saying that Polly had gone because the TARDIS wasn't clean seemed a little bit out of character to me. Now, that unfortunately loses the grandfather type of aspect in the writing with that regards. Although he was right about her saying bloody and asked, just not the smack bottom part. I probably wouldn't have gone that far. What really helps this version of the Doctor, though, is David Bradley. He himself is a fine actor and probably old enough to remember the Hartnell Doctor, actually. From an acting perspective, we always try and get as close to the person that we are trying to play. That means going over footage, watching interviews, and figuring out how to approach the mannerisms. One of the exercises that we used to do a lot in training was learning how to mimic each other's walks, speech patterns, and inflections. It's not an easy feat. So when he comes across with about 98% accurate portrayal, I was really shocked. In actual fact, I think he may have got it even more down pat than the last actor, Richard Herndale, who played this incarnation of the Doctor in 1983 film Five Doctors, not the Two Doctors, excuse me. I just watched that recently for a review. The Five Doctors, and I say that by about 1% more. It's very, very small, just a tiny bit. And also, I will say that this is a skill that all actors really do need to have, because you know you could be understudying a character, you could be a swing for a character, you could be a replacement for a character, like in a soap. You know, they quite often replace the children as they get older to a more experienced child and that kind of thing, or an adult. So you need to obviously take in some of the mannerisms that are done there and start applying it to what your character is, and then obviously progress from there. Now, it's almost like he rehearsed everything just so, like, for example, when he placed his hand and how he delivered the lines, you know, like that. I could imagine the director having very little to do with the interpretation of the Hartnell Doctor, which makes the director's job a lot more easier. Bringing to the table, we call it in this industry. And David Bradley had a lot to bring to this table. He had to bring the imagination and the thought process and his own little je ne sais quoi of the first Doctor, as well as an almost perfect interpretation. And the fact that he also slams the sonic sunglasses, which were used twice in the episode, and the sonic screwdriver, which was used 4 times, also made my day. You all know what I think about that, but what he says is very true. Using your eyes and deducting things for yourself, I wish that would happen in the writing. Get rid of the sonic screwdriver. Obviously, the sonic sunglasses went as soon as we got to Jodie, thank goodness. And even in many respects, Jodie's sonic kept breaking. So, they had no choice but to do a bit of creative writing. And even to this day, even the Shooty Doctor doesn't use the Sonic all that much, but then his Doctor is pretty useless, so I don't expect it to. Shooty's also looks like a Sonic shoe. I'm going to say that. A Sonic trainer, maybe, a Sonic sneaker, whichever you call it. But then again, we also have an irresponsible writer right now who thinks things are way more problematic than what he is making them out to be. Now, one thing I really liked about this is the reprisal of "You've redecorated. I don't like it" joke. So, for those New Who fans who have only ever watched New Who, this is a joke that actually comes from the classic era. I think it was associated with Pat Troughton's Doctor. I think it was Pat Troughton's Doctor that said it first. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I may or may not have got that right. Apologies if I haven't. Now, I just want to ask you all something. Did you know that Bill is a lesbian? Okay, listen, I jest. I honestly jest. Bill is actually a much better character than Clara, in my opinion. And I would rather have had a couple of series with Bill than I would have all the time that we had Clara for. But in my opinion, the constant reminders about her sexuality was just OTT. It wasn't needed. She's a lesbian. I don't care. That's absolutely fine. Whatever. But still, I hope that we all managed to get that message. Now, Bill being a duplicate wasn't all that surprising, to be honest. We all knew that Bill had died. Still, the creepiness of it was something that I love in a Moffat story. I love Blink. I love anything to do that's with Moffat that's creepy. These duplicates are something that could have easily been turned into a joke, actually, I think, or just be blown way out of proportion, much like the Weeping Angels were in the end. I've just mentioned Blink, think from Blink to what they actually became, and it was hands just a popping out and appearing, and it kind of ruined it in itself in the end. But it was just enough to show us, the viewer, that what was going on was not what it all appeared to be. Now, we're led to believe that this is some kind of enemy entity when it takes up the TARDIS and they get captured. But in actual reality, it toys with the idea of memory extraction, which, if you think about it, could potentially become a reality if science ever leaves it to us in real life. Is that a scary thought, or is that something that would be able to enable our memories to live on? I mean, you know what I think about things like the Autons and things coming to life and AI and all of that. You know what I think about that. And to me, it's really creepy. We have ways to record ourselves and what we get up to. And this story, with the historical aspect, also has a very futuristic aspect in many respects. So there's no reason why it can't happen. I mean, we get a good Dalek, for goodness sake. However, the Doctor discovers that this plan isn't an evil one, much to his dismay, because then he doesn't have a good idea, but he should really be happy that it is actually a good idea to begin with, so he doesn't actually have to think how to actually defeat the memory extraction service. However, he does discover that it's more his fault than anyone else's. And this is the problem that he's got to try and solve, because both of the doctors tried to die in the same time and in the same place, which is what displaces the captain, who we find out is called Captain Archibald Hamish Lethbridge Stewart. New Who fans will know of Kate Stewart, who is actually being called Kate Lethbridge Stewart in the recent series, but obviously this is her granddad because her father is Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who is in the classic series. Now, this character is actually a good character, and I will say this, it would actually be really nice to see a historical character companion or even a futuristic companion travel in the TARDIS rather than a contemporary companion that we have had since Rose. Now, one thing's for sure. I think it's safe to say that with the last series, we have now solved the glaring continuity error that was made in this episode. We finally have a reason for it. When they escape, they only take one TARDIS with them. When they return, or make their return back much later, they return with the Hartnell TARDIS and the Capaldi TARDIS, when originally they left in just the Hartnell TARDIS. We can officially say that they bigenerated TARDIS split the TARDIS in the vortex at the moment in time with these two, just without Sutek. Does that work? Does that fix the continuity error? I mean, the giant mallet smashing into the TARDIS by generating at this point in time. I mean, it's a possibility, right? It wouldn't explain the two different interiors, but at least we got, some form of explanation for it. Oh, and the wrong sizes. They're the wrong sizes. But that's not the point. We fixed that problem. Capaldi in this episode was brilliant. I certainly found him very coy, which in many respects he had to be because the first incarnation couldn't know all that much about his future. And there's one thing that I think he did though, and I think it was more an actor choice than a writing choice or a director choice. He toned down his abrupt, brusque nature that he develops with this particular incarnation of the Doctor, and even it tones down a lot of the anger. Now, we can equate that to the possibility of his Doctor being hesitant about regeneration, and that's why. However, the Hartnell Doctor is also of a similar nature in portrayal. Capaldi's Doctor can be much more like the very early Doctors. So Bradley taking on the Hartnell portrayal so well, I feel like Capaldi chose to perhaps pull his version back so that we didn't get the two of the same kind type of portrayal. He didn't undo his interpretation, but there's no way you can undo the first Doctor in the terms of personality, because the first Doctor is the premise for the all the future incarnations of the Doctor, right up to the end of Capaldi, and I guess some of Jodie's as well. I've mentioned it before on this channel where I've discussed understudies for one character or having a slightly different nuance so the actor playing opposite them adjusts very, very slightly. It's easier to have the new Doctor, which would be in this case Peter Capaldi, and I say that loosely because obviously David Bradley's new coming into the first Doctor, but rather than adjusting the interpretation of the classic original and angering the fans, I think it's much safer to do it the way that they did it. You even see that kind of with the three Doctors, the five Doctors, and the two Doctors stories. They all pull back their interpretations a little bit so that they don't clash too much, but it's not that noticeable in many respects. I think actually probably the most noticeable would be the two Doctors. But the two Doctors is, of course, for another video. His monologue at the end is great. I'm not going to read it all to you because it is quite a long one. Moffat, he likes his monologues, but I think that this monologue is true to his version of the Doctor. Once the Bradley Doctor leaves, the Capaldi portrayal almost goes back to normal, actually. The Doctor, I let you go moment was very cool, calm, and collected. He was ready to move on. Capaldi's last line was, "Doctor, I let you go." There is one thing I really want them to do, and that's actually to stop exploding the TARDIS with regeneration energy. It gets same, same, same. It's also, they do it so that each Doctor has their own version of the TARDIS. It's fine, but the TARDIS can regenerate itself. It doesn't have to explode. Ironically, though, I have just said that, and they actually did change Jodie's a little bit. In actual fact, she actually has the prettiest regeneration, I'll give it that, and that's about as far as it goes. But obviously now the introducing bi-generation. So, we're probably not even going to get that anymore. We're probably going to get each doctor splitting off and splitting off and splitting off, and oh, it'd be pointless. I do wish though that it had actually finished at the "Doctor, I let you go" moment rather than going to a female doctor. Explode the TARDIS and have Capaldi plummet from it. The end. Goodbye, Doctor Who. So of course, they kept it going, or even have it regenerate into Jodie and her just fall out the TARDIS, and then that's it, the end. Goodbye, Doctor Who. But they didn't. There's one thing that I want to address, and I haven't yet. I'm pretty neutral on this point, but I actually think your input would be on better on this rather than me having a massive input on it, because I'm pretty neutral. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. So William Hartnell, the original Doctor, left Doctor Who in the 10th Planet because he obviously couldn't continue with the role, and the BBC didn't want to drop the show because it was way too good. They didn't want to. They didn't do actually. Sorry. A massive regeneration story. In actual fact, it wasn't even called Regeneration then, but they needed it to continue, which is why they brought in Patrick Troughton, who is actually here on the screen. So, like I was saying, he didn't get his big regeneration story, and nor did Colin Baker, but that's, for another video. Normally, it's the Doctor's finest hour, a regeneration story, but the 10th Planet, as good as it is, it doesn't actually show the Doctor in his finest hour, so to speak. He just sort of regenerated, and that was it. Now, this story, Twice Upon a Time, in theory, does give him his finest hour, so to speak, but I don't know in that respect. And knowing what I know about Classic, how I feel about him getting the full-blown regeneration story, I guess you could say. So I'm going to leave that up to you in the comments section. Do you prefer the 10th Planet as the regeneration story, or do you prefer Twice Upon a Time and the fact that his regeneration was extended to give him a more conclusive regeneration? If that makes sense. And I hope it does. So please leave that in the comments below in the comments section. And I will also say that there would have been a million and one things that I have missed in this review. I always do. And you guys are always brilliant at filling it in. So, of course, please put it in the comments section below. Let me know what you think of this episode as well. Head on over to the community page to vote on which episode of Doctor Who I should review on a Sunday. There is one that is live right now. I think it's the second Doctor story. If you are just here for Doctor Who only, then I will see you next Sunday at 4 p.m. And if you are here for my other pop culture videos and woke videos, then tune in Sunday to Thursday at 4 p.m. Remember to chat about it, don't shout about it. Like the video if you would like to, and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bye bye.